Welcome everyone to week 4 of Forward. I don't know about you, but it's hard to believe that we're already on the back half of this series. So I hope you've been thinking and talking and seeking and praying and listening to God and how He might want you to be involved as we go forward. I want to make sure you're aware of one of the most significant events of this entire season. It's our Advanced Commitment event on Sunday, October the 16th. Begins at 5 p.m. There's worship, prayer, challenging ourselves to go forward and making our commitments. And this is a chance to lead the way before everyone else makes their pledges. I think it's going to be an amazing evening. It's going to mark a spiritual moment for you and the church. That service will be less than an hour. Following it, you can purchase dinner from food trucks. There's inflatables for the kids, so please make sure that if you are coming, you sign up. Links have been on the program every Sunday. You can find information on our website. The easiest way to sign up is through the app. So that's Advanced Commitment Night, Sunday, October 16th. Now, if you'll remember, in week number 1, I gave you the analogy of listening to the series through 2 AirPods or earbuds. On the one hand, you'll need to listen in terms of the initiative and funding ministry, building a facility, and how Christ Church is moving forward. And then on the other, you're listening to how God wants you personally to take steps forward as we journey through the story of Joshua as he leads the Hebrew people into the Promised Land. Now, last week we saw the people have crossed the Jordan River. They've established a memorial for future generations. They're camping near the city of Jericho. You can read this entire story in Joshua chapter 6, a very famous story, a fun one to hear as a kid. And it's truly amazing how God did this next thing. But part of the journey into this future that God has promised them is to defeat many enemies along the way. Now these are their enemies, but these are also enemies of God. And maybe you know this story, okay? The people were instructed to march around the city of Jericho every day for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, march around 7 times and blow these horns. And then on Joshua's command, everybody would shout together, and the walls will fall down. And so that's what they did, and that's what happened. And then they were able to rush right in and take over the city. So it's an amazing story. It's the first obstacle after crossing the Jordan, and there's a lot we could probably really talk about in that story. But what I want to focus on is one of the instructions God gave to the people, that when you take over the city, everything needs to be destroyed, and don't take anything for yourself. And then we read this in Joshua chapter 6, verse 19. For all the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are dedicated to the Lord and must go into the Lord's treasury. Jump down to verse 24. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze, the iron, into the treasury of the Lord's house. Now, this is an interesting place, okay? The Lord's treasury or the Lord's house, because it usually refers to the physical structure of the temple or maybe the portable tabernacle. And it doesn't seem like they've set anything like that up to this point, so there must be some kind of place dedicated to worship back in the camp. In the future, sometimes it's referred to as the storehouse, right? It might be a food pantry where they store grains, or in this case, they are to store the valuables and the money. So you turn the page to chapter 7, and we read that one person went rogue and decided to keep some for himself, a man named Achan. So after this great victory in Jericho, Joshua is going to advance on a small town. He has such confidence now that he only sends a small group to fight, but they're defeated by an even smaller group. And everyone's discouraged, and they're afraid, and Joshua doesn't understand. And then he gets this insight from God. Joshua chapter 7, verse 11. Israel has sinned. They've violated my covenant that I appointed for them. And here's what they did. They've taken some of what was set apart. They've stolen, deceived, and put those things with their own belongings. And you can read this in chapter 7, but they establish a system on how they will find the guilty person. Everyone has to come forward with their tribe, and then they're divided within that tribe by clan, and within the clan by family, and family gets broken down person by person as they all stand before Joshua, where the man named Achan finally comes forward and says, "It was me. I did it. I took some stuff and I hid it in my tent." Specifically in verse 21, he says, "I coveted those things." And it didn't turn out very well for him, or his family, or his animals. Everybody got included. They were stoned, they were burned, and then they stacked a pile of rocks up on top of him. But hey, it was a rough time, okay? But what God was doing was trying to establish a very important principle that people would need going forward. Now, before I propose some next steps, I want to tell you how this all typically comes together each week. I'm recording this video a week and a half before some of you ever watch it. I might record it 5 days before I even teach it on Sunday. Sometimes I have my act together, but I'm going to admit to you right now that I'm not entirely sure what I should most highlight here on this coming Sunday. I mean, should we focus on reaping and sowing, meaning, Achan tried to reap the rewards of something that he did not do any work to receive. I mean, he took a shortcut, and maybe that needs some attention. Or maybe the highlight is the fact that he decides to hoard for himself rather than trust in God. I mean, what is he actually really going to do with any of this stuff anyway? Is he going to be able to pay rent on his tent with money that he took from Jericho? And what do they even need more stuff for? I mean, God has had a track record over the last 40 years of providing food and water every single day. It's going to be another 7 years before they officially settle into their own places in the promised land. That's a lot of time wandering around with all this stuff. And I think those are great lessons, and they are true. And maybe they will get some attention. But what I think is probably the biggest takeaway is this idea that Achan tried to take what was God's and make it his. And the challenging principle that we usually have to come to terms with is this: God owns everything. I mean, if that's true, then here's the question we have to wrestle with. What does it look like to be faithful with God's things? And I'm going to let you discuss that in your group for the most part, because if God owns everything, then that makes me a manager of God's things. And that most definitely includes acknowledging that God is the giver and the provider of what I have. And it means taking steps to trust Him and honor Him. So when it comes specifically to this season we're in with the Forward Initiative, I want to direct you to the guide on the inside of the back page. Now, if you don't have yours with you, your leader will show you what this looks like, but there's a ladder there. And a great step to take here is to simply identify where you are now and move to the next level. Can I move to the next level and still pay my bills and have food and trust God? Some of you are going to realize that you are giving at a level in which you haven't had to trust God before, and it's time for you to take a step. As I've said from the very beginning, I think everyone should be involved and do something. And I think the step that you take here is going to be spiritual. It's going to grow your faith and your trust in God. And then speaking from the standpoint of a church-wide initiative, I'm still not going to tell you what that is. I think you got to take a step. And I'm actually going to leave this one hanging this week and just simply ask you this question again, and I think there'll be some amazing discussion. But what does it look like to be faithful with God's things?